Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've lived in my condo for about 3 years now. It's generally a peaceful community with reasonable neighbors and a pretty straightforward setup. Each resident has their assigned parking spot clearly marked with their unit number. There are also several visitor spots throughout the complex, easily identifiable with visitor painted in bold white letters. I work from home most days, but occasionally I need to go into the office for important meetings. On this Tuesday, I had a morning meeting that wrapped up earlier than expected, so I decided to head home around 1 p.m. instead of staying at the office all day. When I pulled into our condo complex, I was looking forward to a quiet afternoon of catching up on some personal projects. But that plan was quickly derailed when I turned the corner toward my assigned spot. There it was, a massive black SUV parked right in my space. I immediately felt that surge of annoyance that comes when someone disrespects clearly established boundaries. What made it even more irritating was that the parking lot was practically empty. There were at least 5 visitor spots available within eyesight of mine. I'm usually a pretty reasonable person. I understand that sometimes visitors make honest mistakes. So instead of immediately calling to complain, I decided to handle it directly. I parked my car directly behind the SUV, blocking them in, and walked up to the driver's window. The window rolled down to reveal a middle-aged man in a blazer, looking annoyed that I'd interrupted whatever he was doing on his phone. I politely asked him how long he was planning to stay in my parking spot. He replied that he would be there for about 45 minutes. I suggested that he move to one of the empty visitor spots that were right across from us. What happened next caught me completely off guard. His face twisted into a scowl and he responded with the most shrill, high-pitched voice I've ever heard from a grown man. He refused to move, declaring that he was a realtor showing the property. He insisted, while pointing dramatically at the condo unit in front of my parking space, that the property management had specifically told him to park in that exact spot. He added that his clients would be arriving any minute now. I highly doubted the property management had given him permission to use my assigned spot. They know better than that. But this guy was already working himself into a frenzy, and I could tell this conversation wasn't going anywhere productive. I simply told him okay then, and walked away. While he was still in the middle of his rant, I moved my car to one of the many available visitor spots and headed into my unit. I could see him still sitting there, probably feeling victorious about defending his right to my parking space. Once inside, I dropped my bag on the couch and walked to my window, which conveniently overlooks the parking lot. I could see the SUV guy pacing near his vehicle, checking his watch. He appeared to be waiting for his clients to arrive. That's when inspiration struck. Rude people who defend their bad behavior really get under my skin, and I wasn't going to just let this slide. I grabbed my large Bluetooth speaker and placed it directly on my windowsill. I pulled up my playlist labeled Workout Motivation, a collection of hardcore rap with explicit lyrics and heavy bass. I cranked the volume up to about 80%, loud enough to be heard clearly in the parking lot, but not quite loud enough to damage my speaker. Then I hit play. The booming bass and explicit lyrics filled the air. I watched as the realtor's head snapped toward my window. He looked utterly appalled. About 10 minutes later, a couple pulled up in a sedan, presumably the potential buyers. I could see them exchanging confused looks as they approached the realtor while my music continued to blast. The realtor kept gesturing apologetically toward the complex in general, clearly trying to explain away the noise issue. I could see them having to lean in close to hear each other over my impromptu concert. After about 30 minutes, when I figured they'd had the full tour, I turned off the music. I watched through my window as the couple hastily shook the realtor's hand and practically sprinted back to their car. They were talking animatedly to each other, and neither looked impressed. The realtor stood in the parking lot looking defeated as they drove away. He got into his SUV and sat there for a few minutes, probably making notes about the failed showing before finally driving off. I felt satisfied with my small act of revenge. I hadn't broken any rules. There were no noise restrictions during daytime hours in our community guidelines. Most of my neighbors were at work anyway, so I hadn't disturbed anyone else. And as for his potential sale, well, I doubt those buyers left with a positive impression of our quiet community. I've been working at the Golden Fork for almost 3 years now. It's one of the most popular restaurants in our city, known for its amazing seafood an incredible weekend brunch. We're constantly booked weeks in advance, especially for Friday and Saturday nights. I started as a busboy and worked my way up to being the front of house manager. It's a stressful job, but I genuinely love it. Well, most days at least. Restaurant policy is pretty strict. Reservations are held for 15 minutes, then the table goes to the next people on the waiting list. We have to do this because we're always packed, and it's not fair to make others wait when someone doesn't show up on time. Last Saturday was kind of busy. We had a full reservation list plus a waiting list of about 20 parties hoping to get in. Everything was going smoothly until about 8:45 p.m. I was helping seat a family of 4 when this woman stormed in. She walked straight up to the hostess podium, cutting in front of 3 other parties who were waiting to check in. The woman immediately declared that she had a reservation and insisted her name was on our list. She was extremely demanding in her tone. My hostess, a college student working part-time, looked uncomfortable as she checked the system. She politely explained to the woman that her reservation had been for 8 p.m. and since we had held the table for 15 minutes without her arrival, we had given it to another party. The woman's face turned red. She slammed her purse down on the podium. She started yelling about how ridiculous this was and that she was only 45 minutes late. She then tried to intimidate us by revealing she was a director at a major customer service company and dealt with customer satisfaction professionally. She called our service unacceptable in a very loud voice. I could see my co-worker getting flustered, so I stepped in. I greeted the woman professionally and introduced myself as the manager on duty. I explained our policy about holding reservations for only 15 minutes before giving tables to waiting guests. The woman dismissed our policy completely. She angrily reminded me that she had made her reservation 2 weeks ago and demanded her table immediately. I tried to be understanding while explaining that her table had already been given to another party who was currently eating their main course. I offered to put her at the top of our waiting list but mentioned the current wait was about 90 minutes. The woman was outraged at the wait time and shockingly suggested we kick out the customers who were currently at her table. Her voice was so loud that the entire lobby fell silent. People were staring. I told her that we would never ask paying customers who were in the middle of their meal to leave, as that wasn't how we conducted our business. The woman became even more aggressive, announcing that was how she conducted her business. She then pulled out her phone and started recording me. She threatened that she wanted everyone to see how our restaurant treated its customers and falsely claimed we were discriminating against her. I asked her to lower her voice and clarified that no discrimination was happening, as our policy applied equally to everyone. That's when she really lost it. She looked around the restaurant and made a horribly racist comment, suggesting that if she were like our Mexican kitchen staff, we would have saved her table. The restaurant went completely silent. I told her that she needed to leave the restaurant immediately as we didn't tolerate racist comments toward our staff or customers. She refused to leave, claiming she was a paying customer and we couldn't kick her out. I corrected her, pointing out that she wasn't actually a customer since she didn't have a table, and now never would. I explained that we reserved the right to refuse service, especially to people who made racist remarks, and asked her to leave before I called security. She continued recording as she backed toward the door, threatening that everyone would see the video when it went viral and bragging about having over 5,000 followers. She finally left, still shouting about how she was going to ruin us on social media. The next day, I woke up to texts from several co-workers. Her video had gone viral, but not in the way she expected. She'd posted the entire interaction, clearly thinking she was in the right, but the comments were overwhelmingly against her. People were calling out her entitled behavior, and especially her racist comment about our kitchen staff. By Sunday evening, someone had identified her and tagged her employer, that big customer service company she'd bragged about working for as a director. Monday morning, the company's official social media accounts released a statement. We are aware of the video circulating involving one of our employees. The behavior shown does not reflect our company values of respect and inclusivity. After investigation, this individual is no longer employed at our company. She tried to set her social media to private, but it was too late. The internet never forgets. 2 weeks later, she called the restaurant asking to speak to the owner, probably to complain about me. The owner, who had seen the video and fully supported my decision, took the call. I don't know exactly what was said, but afterward, he came out of his office laughing. The owner told me that the woman had asked if we'd write her a letter saying the incident was overblown to help her get a new job. He had responded by telling her she should try being on time for her next interview. Justice served, just like our meals, right on time. I never liked getting into arguments. In our small English town, I always kept to myself and stayed out of trouble. People here are usually nice, so things like catcalling don't happen often. That's why I was so surprised when it happened to my friend. I'm gender fluid, and on that one day, I was presenting very masculine. On that one day, I had on my favorite loose jeans, a plain button-up, and my hair styled in a way that made me feel confident. My friend, on the other hand, was wearing less masculine clothes, I guess. We hadn't seen each other in person for months. Between my work schedule and his university classes, we'd been limited to texts and calls. So when we finally had a free day that matched up, we jumped at the chance to hang out. We were walking through the local shopping area, catching up on everything we'd missed in each other's lives, when we noticed a group of guys walking toward us. They looked a bit older than us, maybe mid-20s, and there were 3 of them. As they approached, I noticed their eyes lock onto my friend. He had some makeup on, and they definitely thought he was a girl. We tried to just walk past them without making eye contact, but one of them stepped slightly into our path. The first guy started catcalling my friend, saying he was absolutely ling, and using that word I hate because it makes no sense to me. It's supposed to be a compliment meaning someone's attractive, but it just sounds ridiculous. Then the second guy joined in, asking my friend where he was headed and if he wanted some company. His tone was suggestive and made me uncomfortable even though I wasn't the target. I could feel my friend tense up beside me. He wasn't scared. I knew him well enough to recognize when he was angry and uncomfortable. His jaw was clenched and his eyes had narrowed slightly. I wasn't going to stand by while he dealt with this harassment. Without thinking it through, I turned to face the guys. I bluntly told them that my friend was actually a man. I wanted to shock them, and it worked. The silence that followed was deafening. Their mouths hung open and they looked at each other as if trying to figure out how to respond. Then, without saying another word, they turned and walked away quickly, pretending as if they hadn't just been catcalling someone. Once they were out of earshot, my friend and I burst into laughter. I actually had to lean against a nearby wall to keep from doubling over completely. My friend was clutching his stomach, tears streaming down his face from laughing so hard. I pointed out how shocked they looked, saying I thought one guy was about to faint. My friend agreed and commented on how quickly they ran off like scared children. We spent the next few minutes trying to catch our breath, occasionally setting each other off into new fits of giggles whenever we made eye contact. I mentioned that hopefully they would think twice before hitting on random women in public again. My friend joked about what would happen if they told that story to their friends, imagining them admitting they were catcalling someone they thought was a girl who turned out to be a guy who claimed to be better endowed than all of them combined. That set us off again, and I nearly cried in public from laughing so hard. It wasn't just the humor of the situation, it was the relief of standing up to those creeps and seeing them retreat so quickly. We continued our day together, stopping for coffee and visiting some shops. The incident became an inside joke between us, and for weeks afterward, one of us would occasionally text the other with the measuring line, which would send us into fits of laughter all over again. Those guys never bothered us again. In fact, I saw one of them across the street a few weeks later, and he immediately changed direction when he spotted me. I hope I scared them too much to ever catcall anyone again, regardless of how they present. A few years back, I was a contractor for a state agency whose job it was to advise other state contractors on environmental laws, regulations, policies, and best practices. What this really meant was that I spent my days telling other contractors who, what, where, when, how, and how much they could do their jobs. My only real power came from the fact that the agency I contracted with had regulatory authority. They could impose hefty fines or demand expensive remediation if contractors didn't comply. To make matters worse, for my likability factor, I was a middle-aged, clean-shaven white guy who always showed up in spotless boots and a bright white hard hat that practically glowed in the sun. I'd roll up in a state-owned vehicle that was just as clean as I was, looking like I'd never done a day of real labor in my life. The way the billing worked made me even more popular. My agency billed the other contractor at a set hourly rate. These contractors had to work this cost into their own contract with the state. So every hour I spent on their site directly cut into their profit margin. You can imagine how thrilled they were to see me pull up. One project I was assigned to involved a national construction company. a major player in the industry. This was unusual since bigger companies typically employed their own environmental compliance staff. I've been working with this company for a little over a year when they finally broke ground on the project. I sent an email to the lead foreman, whom I hadn't yet met in person, letting him know I'd be on site the following week. The foreman replied in an email stating that I would need to attend the daily stand-up meeting at the yard every day I planned to be on site. He made it clear there would be no exceptions. I responded by explaining that I already had all my certifications, both federal and state, and had attended their company's biannual safety meeting. I pointed out that attending these daily stand-ups would be unnecessary and would increase billable hours to their company. I made sure to copy my point of contact to the company, hoping they'd straighten this out. The foreman wrote back insisting that I had to attend and that this requirement was non-negotiable. My point of contact never responded. Fine then, malicious compliance it is. The way my contract worked, my billable time started the moment I walked out my front door. The yard where these mandatory stand-up meetings were held was over an hour away depending on traffic. The meetings themselves usually lasted between 45 minutes to an hour, covering topics that had absolutely nothing to do with my work. Then I'd have to travel from the yard to the actual job site, which was another 2-hour drive, and then back home at the end of the day. This ridiculous requirement added roughly 4 hours to my workday, pushing me well beyond 8 hours, which meant I was billing at time and a half for overtime. Plus, I charged for mileage and fuel for the state vehicle. Sometimes the cell service at the job site was terrible, and my hotspot wouldn't connect properly. When that happened, I couldn't complete my work on site and had to finish it at home, while still on the clock, of course. I dutifully sent my invoice to the company's accounting department every other week. And yes, the time spent preparing these invoices was also billable. After the first billing cycle, there was no response. No problem. I kept following the foreman's requirements to the letter. After the second billing cycle, I received an email from the Vice President of Operations with my point of contact copied. In this email, the VP demanded an explanation for what he called excessive charges, hours, and mileage. His tone was clearly angry and accusatory. I gathered all the emails between the foreman and myself, my detailed invoices, mileage logs, and timesheets. I forwarded everything to the VP, making sure to copy both my point of contact and the foreman. Within less than an hour, I received an email from my point of contact. In this message, he told me that after reviewing the situation, they had determined that I could do what I pleased when I pleased, including total stoppage of work on site if necessary. He clarified that the only person I was accountable to was him directly, and that I should disregard previous instructions from the foreman. The VP and foreman were both copied on this email. I wish I could have been a fly on the wall for the conversation that must have happened in the hour between my email and this response. I imagine the foreman got quite an earful about unnecessarily increasing costs and trying to micromanage a state regulatory contractor. From then on, I went back to my regular schedule, showing up when needed, doing my job efficiently, and leaving when done. No more pointless meetings, no more excessive travel time, and no more inflated invoices. That evening, I took my spouse out for a very nice dinner. After all, I'd earned it by doing exactly what I was told. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.